Well, hello there. Thanks for tuning in today to Fresh Catholic Podcast. For the next few weeks, Simon and I are going to be getting ready to go on our traveling adventure around the United States. So we are rebooting past episodes that we think you will really enjoy and people in the past have enjoyed. So if you've heard this episode before, have a listen again. It doesn't hurt to hear things twice, right? You might pick up on something you missed the first time. Also, if you're a new listener, have a listen to this episode because it was very impactful. I had a guest last spring, April of 2025, Father Donald Haggerty. He is a priest at the Archdiocese of New York at St. Patrick's Cathedral, one of my favorite places. And he came to talk about his book, The Hour of Testing. Now, this episode is a very serious topic because, as you can tell in this world, everything's very chaotic. And Father Haggerty comes to talk about how we really need to get our life straight with the Lord. We need to make sure we're going to confession. We need to really be trying to lead a very holy life and following all the rules and the guidelines of our church and our faith, because they were all put in place for our own good by our Lord. So he has, this message where we really do need to get things straight, because you never know when the Lord's coming back, and we all want to be very prepared for that. So I hope you really enjoy this episode. And again, it's kind of a serious episode, but it's really impactful and important because, when you live in a world where there's not a lot of rules and everybody's kind of going off the deep end, the Lord is our guide. He is our compass, and that's who we want to be right with. Not worldly things, but of the Lord. So have a listen, and I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome. I'm Lori Balderas, and I'm so happy you're here. Well, once again, I have a guest who is an author, but this time my guest is a priest. And so I don't think I've had a priest who's an author. So, we're just mixing it up a little bit here. But I am very honored to have Father Donald Haggerty. He's a priest of the Archdiocese of New York and serves at St. Patrick's Cathedral, one of my favorite places on the earth. I went there one time in my life so far, and it made such an impression on me. And so when I heard he was from there, I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. He taught moral theology and worked as a spiritual director in seminaries for 20 years and has directed many retreats worldwide for the Missionaries of Charity, which is a congregation of St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Amazing. He is the author of numerous books on spirituality, including The Contemplative Hunger, Conversion, Contemplative Enigmas, and St. John of the Cross, Master of Contemplation. Oh my gosh, that's so many books. He's here today to discuss his new book, The Hour of Testing, which is spiritual depth and insight in a time of ecclesial uncertainty. I hope I said that right. Anyway, it's a very serious subject, and I think it's a very important and current subject. And so I was very fascinated to have him as a guest, and I really value his time. So we're going to get going on this interview. Hello, Father. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Lori, for having me.
I hope I said all that right. I want to be sure I'm giving you the correct honor you deserve.
Well, thank you, Lori. There's one other. You missed my first book called Contemplative Provocations.
Oh my gosh, it wasn't on my
fine.
list that was given.
Wasn't on your list. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, look at you. You're just writing
Everyone's
so many
proud
books.
of their first child. No.
We don't want to forget any of that. So this book, your new book, The Hour of Testing, I like I said, I think it's a very serious subject matter, but I think it's very important. And so I would love for you to let my readers know your overview of what the book is about so that then we can talk about it.
This book is a book of serious spirituality. The other books I've written are also books of serious spirituality on contemplative life, contemplative prayer, interior life. And the last one on St. John of the Cross is a, large commentary on St. John of the Cross. And this book, with that background of spirituality in my priesthood and my great desires of life. This book is written also with an awareness, the question of the kind of error that we're living in now, the manner in which the church has undergone what seems to be greater struggle in our own time in recent years, and then how does that, you know, raise the question for spirituality? How do we live ourselves in a more serious manner in our spiritual life? And also, what kind of error are we living in? So the book has three parts. I divide it in three sections. And the first section is taking up questions of what type of error are we living in the church now? What's going on in the world? The darker element that is present right now. And then the second and third part are taking up, serious questions of how to respond to this in the interior life of prayer, in our response spiritually. So that's basically what I've done in this work.
I think that's awesome and wonderful. When we had our pre-interview, I was telling you that I feel that this is such an important book because I feel like most of the time, and again, I'm not privy to everything that's going on in the Catholic Church or in everybody's parishes, but in the world, for sure, we are definitely, there's a lot of sliding downhill that I see in, Catholics, Protestants, people who don't, the nuns who don't have a religion that they affiliate with. And I feel like if we pretend like these things aren't happening, then we're putting on blinders. And if we're not calling attention to what is happening in our world, then we're just enabling it and we're a part of it. And I think it's sometimes what I gather is, I was telling you, I don't believe there's a lot of priests that are being honest and coming out and kind of, waking people up and saying, let's get it together. We you have one life that you have to really make sure that you're right with God. So I think it's good. It's obviously a very important time for that. I mean, I think the church has always had struggles. Nobody's saying the Catholic Church is perfect or any church is perfect, but our world today it's very out of control and it's scary.
Yeah, well, part of the question is what's going on in the world, and we've had many times historically where there are, very dark things happening. And my parents lived through World War II, and if you lived in Germany in that period, if you lived in the Soviet Union during communism, I mean, these are very serious external aspects to live in a challenging one's life of faith. But I think right now we also face not just the external aspects of, a culture of darkness, but also what's going on within the church, which there is a certain instability that has been going on for a bit. And so that would raise questions. There's serious questions right now. Where are we going in time, even in this 21st century? And so I'm not giving answers to that, but I am raising questions. It is possibly an hour of testing. And then what should we be doing ourselves spiritually to pick up our life spiritually, before God? It's not a matter of being defensive and just trying to hold on to our breath. underneath the water, but really to start swimming, in a strong way, for God and for souls, that we're aware of. It's a time of danger, perhaps spiritually right now.
Yes, I agree. I really agree. And again, it's not to say, like you were saying, there's been things in the past that have happened, but you know, to address these things, to wake up, and figure out where our life is going, what we can do to change, our ways, or how we can be an advocate for people to want to open their eyes and change, so that they're again, like, on the right path with the Lord, for eternity.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. That's always been a question. That's part of Catholic life always. But there is what I've taken up in this book also, and I begin with the first chapter. Our Lord does ask that question: when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on earth? So that's in the initial paragraph of this book. And I write, as I've written the previous books, with isolated reflections that flow into one another, but each one kind of stands on their own. And that first one is raising that question. I mean, I even mentioned that our Lord could have said, "When I return, will I find prayer, on earth?" Now, of course, He will. He will find there will be souls of intense faith and intense prayer, but it may be a very small remnant at that point. And one of the questions of our time is, what are we just going through a difficult time in the church, a time of crisis, even a crisis of faith that will recover, and that we have seen many times, this rhythm of the church going through difficulties and then recovering? Or are we facing what we do know in our Catholic faith, that, history does have a termination point and it doesn't go on forever? And it doesn't mean that, we're facing that right now, but are we seeing signs? I think we have to ask the question now: are we seeing symptoms and signs, not of the second coming, that, simply, because that becomes a little too simplistically overdramatic, but are we seeing the beginning signs of what will, as the church teaches, be a time of terrible testing and turmoil within the church itself prior to the return of our Lord? And even as I have a chapter in this book, the speculations about the possibility of an antichrist figure arising. Again, that's not, as I say in the book, in one item, it's not to start guessing who that could be. We don't have that present before us yet, but to start raising those kind of questions, because what is happening right now is not just a drift or decline in the church, or people not practicing as before, but we may be crossing some thresholds, some borderlines that we have never seen before. So that would sound to me like, let's pay attention to these symptoms, that it's not an ordinary thing that will just reverse itself and recover.
What in your mind was a moment where things really shifted? I mean, I think, like we're saying, there's always been some sort of trouble, but what, in your opinion, was there a moment, or do you think it's been a slow progression of, people turning away, and there being, extra problems in the church?
Well, there's a convergence of things, but I think, looking ahead, I think we have to say, we face the possibility, in our coming years now, maybe soon, of unprecedented things happening in the church. So the possibility of reversal of irreversible teaching in moral doctrine is not inconceivable now. And this is being talked about, even at high levels in the church. Cardinals, in some cases, are speaking of changing, for instance, the teaching, modifying, altering teaching in regard to homosexual acts. And that would be unprecedented in the church. We've had bad popes. We've had popes who were morally, living, egregious lives. But we have never had popes, we have never had a magisterium reverse teaching that would be traditionally understood as infallible, irreversible, unchangeable moral doctrine. So things like that, we're moving in that direction right now, unless that finds a halt in some way. So that would sound to me like, and that's not just that didn't happen overnight. We have a background to this, for the last 50 years. We had a very strong papacy in Paul VI and John Paul II and Pope Benedict. But in this time, Pope Francis is a very good, holy man, I'm sure, in his own, in a certain way. But he has been influenced and surrounded by, in some cases, by some influences that perhaps are not healthy influences. And if I would, if you would like an example, somebody pointed out to me just in the last 2 days a clarification by our present prefect of the Dicastery for Doctrine of the Faith. And he posed now a clarification on what had been teaching in the church, recent teaching, prohibiting any possibility of transgender surgeries. And now he has written a clarification saying there could be exceptions to this that the church would allow. Now, that principle of allowing exceptions for what could be understood as intrinsically an intrinsically evil, prohibited thing, we're seeing signs, symptoms there that could go further as time goes on.
Well, and I think,
And so those are the things I worry about in a
yeah, I
way.
mean, I worry about those things too. I'm a convert. I converted, I guess it's been a while now. I'm thinking at least 10 years. But one of the reasons that I really love the Catholic faith is because I feel secure in it. I feel that it's, like in my mind, when I first, came into the church, I was thinking, I love this because it's not going to change. It's, it's set and I can count on it. And I know that I can feel safe and secure with it. But I agree with you that, in our day and age now, there's so much where you have to be so strong. There's so many of these voices. They're now even more out of control than I think they've been prior to this. And they're just relentless. It's just almost like a tapping till you do what they want, sort of a thing. And I definitely don't want my church to bend. I like it to be, I don't want women to be priests. I don't want certain things, that people are wanting the Catholic Church to change. It's like, if you don't like it, go to your other church. Go ahead, go lead your life, but let the Catholics have, what Christ started, what, we're supposed to be following, and let us have that. And I feel like you have to be really strong. I know in my own personal life, I have people and things that expect me to change my thought process to suit them. And my answer is no. Even though I love them, I'm not changing what I'm doing because my number one thing in life is Christ. That's it. And I'm not bending. And they are having a very hard time with that. But I'm just staying very focused. But I can see how people drift off and they just got, well, I don't want to cause a problem, or I don't want to. That's why I'm telling you, I wish more priests would get up in their homilies and be more firm and stay, to not be, I don't need a popular priest. I don't need him to want to cater to people. I want him to be firm, because when I look at my priest, I see Christ. I need him to be Christ. And Christ stayed firm. People have a misconception of Christ a lot of the time if they don't know him, that, oh, he just went along with everything. He did not. He did not.
I mean, it's very beautifully said, Laurie. But the problem is it's not just that the outside world, would be resistant, hostile to our Catholic thinking. The problem now has become more in the last years of an ambiguity within the church, as those things can change, and even the question. We'll see how it plays out over time, and in the next papacy, when that eventually does come. But what does the church do with synodality, after a time? And, this notion of having meetings, committee meetings, and discussing, doctrinal things that at times, actually don't have a discussion as though they could be changed. And to have things on an agenda that could be pushed forward in some way to alteration. That's very dangerous, and it wouldn't break the church if, decisions were made to change teaching, and certain teachings, but it would wound the church, and it would be a sign, an unprecedented sign, that maybe you're entering another era within the church. So, I mean, the church could change. They were contemplating it. In fact, I think many people expected that Pope Francis might allow married priests after the Amazon Synod. Now, that would not be the end of the world. It would be perhaps a beginning of a problematic move in the church. But I'm talking about, more serious things here, where if you, and we've heard some signs of it already, even going back with Amoris Laetitia, allowing, giving permission for couples in second marriages without a second Catholic marriage, but in a civil marriage, in some cases, with exceptions, in a case-by-case discernment, to allow for the reception of the Eucharist. Now, these are things that, actually that was addressed already in the papacy of Pope John Paul II and of Pope Benedict. But those kind of things are, saying, well, we have to go case by case in these things, and they do allow for a permission toward things that would have been understood to be forbidden without exception previously. So to me, those are symptoms. We might be seeing birth pangs of what's coming, down the line. And it does, say to anybody who's listening or watching this or reads this book, we need to wake up also too, because it's important in two things, not to be just naively assuming that everything that the church then would pronounce is what God wanted. That's not necessarily so.
Right.
And secondly, that we don't drift away from the church and lose you know, that we do out the opposite and try to give ourselves more fully to a serious life of prayer and living for others. And that would seem to me the moment we're living in now.
Right. I put a pin in it because I have a lot more I want to talk to you about, but we need to take a quick break. Okay. So we'll be right back. Have you ever wanted to witness the miraculous and walk where saints have walked? This is your chance. Join me, Laurie Balderas, host of Fresh Catholic Podcast, and Father Matthew Miguel, as we walk with you through Italy's most sacred sites. From the Eucharistic miracles of Lanciano and Orvieto to the peace of Assisi, your heart will be transformed by these extraordinary moments of grace. You'll walk the hallowed streets of Rome, step into the history of the Vatican, and witness the places where faith has flourished for centuries. Each stop deepens your journey. Each miracle renews your soul. We invite you to join us on an unforgettable, life-changing experience.
Join us and let your faith come alive in Italy.
And we're back. So you were talking about, there's so much to talk about with this topic, because I feel like there's been, because I asked you at the beginning of this episode, do you think this has been something where there was a moment where everything shifted, or has this been progressing along? And I feel like, in my mind, there's a lot of things where there's a chipping away, where, you start off with allowing one thing, and it turns into another thing and a bigger thing and a bigger thing. And pretty soon, and this isn't just in the church, this is in like parenting, in just life in general. It's like you give somebody a little bit and they just want more and more and more. And I do think, I would imagine there's all different types of churches and parishes out there, and the way that the priests handle, their congregation. But I've noticed that lately, the kind of the new shift, if you want to call it, is that there's a lot of men going back to the Catholic Church, and they want the more traditional Latin Mass. They don't want, like I, even at my church, we have different church services, and the one that I particularly like to go to is what I consider the most traditional of all of them. I struggle with the ones that I consider like rah-rah Protestant Christian, which is fine for people, but it's not fine for me. I like it more traditional. And again, I don't want the rules to be changed. I like the tradition. I like the strictness. I feel like, just to be honest, my church, I think, is getting a little too loose for me. I think a lot of it shifted in COVID. Things changed the way we were doing things, and I don't find it as fulfilling as I used to, which is unfortunate. And it makes me wonder if that's happening in a lot of churches. But I also agree with you that there's a lot of things going on within the church. It's not necessarily, the outside people, trying to change what we're doing. It is scary to hear that they're having meetings. I don't want them to have the meetings. It needs to be, no, this is not what we're doing. It shouldn't even be a discussion. There's times when you have children where they'll come to you and you'll say, well, maybe. And then there's times where it's like, no, the answer's no. It's like a flat no. Like, why are you even asking me? That's a no. And I need to hear that from the church, that it's like, it's a no. Otherwise you start getting too wishy-washy. It gets blurry. There's times where I'll go and ask questions, because I work at the church. I'm on the staff there. And I'll ask questions, and it's like, well, I don't like that answer, because I want it to be a strict answer. I don't want it to be a wishy-washy answer. If I wanted that, I'd go to a different church. I became Catholic because I wanted it to be, strict, and because I know it's for my own good. It's like when you give your children rules, the parents have to be in charge of the family, and there has to be the rules because it's for the safety and goodness of the family. If you start just going, oh yeah, you can eat whatever you want, do whatever you want, go ahead, that doesn't make people feel very secure.
No, I mean, I agree totally, Lori, and I think, and part of this is, these are serious transcendent questions too about God, and, has God given us, revealed truth? And what is the truth of the manner in which the human person flourishes? So aspects of morality are not secondary, questions of our relationship with God. And it's not just a question of good behavior, that we behave ourselves. Everybody has their experiences of sin in life. It's much more serious than that, because the reality of truth, is not a changeable thing. If there are moral it's not moral rules as much as, engraved, laws that have been written into human nature by God. And it's not as though he's, the headmaster of a strict school here, trying to enforce the rules of the school upon us and making us unhappy with the straitjacket put around us. It's rather that, like in a good marriage, when you're faithful in your marriage, you flourish as a human person. If there is sacrifice in one's life and we're giving ourselves for others, you end up, a happy person for flourishing, humanly. So the problem with these, if we don't take seriously the moral life, that does affect our relationship with God, and and some things could be considered rules, but it's much more serious than that. As an example, when I bring up in the book the question of the reception of communion of the Holy Eucharist, the body of Christ, to my mind, and there's no way to prove this, but I think we're living in the era of sacrilege unlike any other time in the history of the church. And that's a serious wound to the church itself. If many people receive the Holy Eucharist when they do need to go to confession prior to receiving communion because they're in a state of mortal sin, if there is no acknowledgement that there are smaller sins, but there are also serious sins, there are grave sins, there are mortal sins. And if that has been diminished in the awareness of Catholic people, possibly because priests are not, speaking of these things anymore, or it's not taught in religious education, whether in Catholic schools or in religious education programs, if that's taking place, that's a serious wound to the church. So the fact that we don't have reverent, truly, traditional, sacred, liturgies, that's in part because the Eucharist itself is not treated as the sacred reality that it is. It's not, as we know, we and everybody watching, this is not a piece of bread we receive. Under that under that appearance is the invisible reality of God. So that those kind of things are affecting in a deep way, the reality of the church, how we treat Jesus Christ himself in the Eucharist. And, there are implications in the moral life, how that's lived out.
Do you believe that the clergy in our times right now are trying to be too popular and too like they're being somewhat passive so that or a lot passive so that they can get more people back into the church, like where they think, well, if we do this we'll get more people back into the church, like let's stay up with the times. And it's like, again, I don't want flashing screens and this and that. I want it to be very focused on why we're there, which is to receive the Lord into our body, so that we can get strength from him and be more Christ-like. The more we put Christ into our body, the God willing, we'll become Christ-like. But do you think that clergy and priests are trying to just get people back into the church however they can, and they're just thinking, well, if we soften these rules, or if we just turn the blind eye, or don't pressure people, and give them their rules, that they'll come back? Is that adding to the problem?
I would be unable to, answer that question in a general way. I think there are many good holy priests, and I think a lot of younger priests, younger generations of priests, in the last 15, 20 years. I'm a priest 35 years. I know priests that are very, very rock solid, and we have many good priests in New York, I would say. A lot depends on your seminary training. We're affected by models and examples, and dioceses vary in this. There are dioceses like Lincoln, Nebraska, who used to use our New York seminary, Arlington, Virginia, other places that, have very strong priesthood. And in their diocesan priests, there are some of the religious orders, like the CFRs, the Community of the Friars of Renewal of Benedict Rochelle. There are very good groups. I can't speak for a diocese. I don't know. I think in every diocese, you have some good younger priests, but we also have a problem with vocations now. I mean, New York is a good diocese in its background, but we have a very serious problem in getting men into the seminary now. We have a very sparsity of men studying for the priesthood. So the cardinal right now is asking, he's written a letter asking the priests to speak of this and asking for a holy hour every Thursday in every parish now on, I think, the first Thursday of the month. So that would vary a lot. It depends on where we are. Leadership affects our lives, from the top in the Pope, all the bishop of a diocese, the priest of a parish. We're affected by, the leadership. We're affected by teachers in our lives. And so that varies. If a man is prayerful as a priest, and then you have a good chance that things will go well. If people don't pray and you're in a position of influencing people spiritually, that's often not going to have the best results. And then people do think in terms of efficiency or numbers, drawing people and making people happy as they walk out the church door. I mean, these things are not the real focus of, you know, the importance of souls that are in front of us.
Right, I agree. We had a priest. I'm very close with him. I knew him when he was a seminarian, and when I like I said, I'm on the staff, and we did a exercise one time, and we had to sit across from each person on the staff and say, what did we value about them? And I told him, I said, I think you are such a good, firm priest. Don't ever change. Like stay strong, because when I would go to him, he wouldn't give me necessarily the answer to pat me on my head and send me off, thinking everything was fine. He was very firm with me, and it really made me take things very seriously, and to walk away and think, I really want to make this better. I am sinning. I need to change my ways and mean it. And, he didn't just always say, it's fine, it'll be fine. He'd say, this isn't fine. Like, I'm glad you came today because this isn't fine, and I just think, we are living in a world where everything's, very blurry, and people are trying to talk other people into what, that we're just supposed to be going along with everything. And again, back to the original idea that God wants us, to follow the plan that he made, and it's for our own good. And we're, people aren't grasping that. And I think it's because they don't want to grasp it. But it is so serious. You're right. Because when it comes down to it, if you're not in the right place with God, I could walk out of this door right now and be killed. And if I'm not right with God, I'm in big trouble. I don't want to put it off. I want to be sure that I'm always in the right spot, and I just think everybody's kind of not taking it seriously enough. I mean, are you finding, obviously you're finding that because you're writing this book, or you wrote this book.
Well, I'm affected by, I've been affected by living in New York City, in the last almost 9 years, since I had lived in Ethiopia before that for 4 years. But, coming back and living in the city, you do get the impression that for many people, and then this would include outside the Catholic world, but many people, I don't think they have a thought of God. There's too much, there's so much occupation of the mind in other things, including technology, that's just, people have obsessive knee compulsive turning to things that make God very irrelevant to life. So, as I mentioned in this book, I think we're living in a time now where, you don't have to take a lot of trouble to refuse God. He's just not even on the radar for many people. So, and this is true too for Catholic people. And I think what I'm trying to say in this book is that we may be seeing signs there in which We're entering into decades now, or less than decades. It may not be, a lot of decades, where we may be entering a grave, significant, in a determining moment in the history of Christianity. And there is the doctrine of the second coming, as we know from pronouncing the creed, and there will be a hard crisis period before that. We may be beginning that time. We may be already in it. It's possible. So what I'm saying now, and anybody listening, it's time to step up a serious life of prayer. So my sense is, it's time to go all in one way, not to be just it's a good thing, but not just the routine mass goer on Sundays, who I say my few throwaway prayers, every day, casual prayer or two in the morning and night. I think, and I've seen it in New York now, because you do see these things. I see many people who go to mass every day. And I think what's going to happen is that the Sunday mass goers are going to wake up in some cases and realize, I need to have this kind of life every day with God. And I do see that. I see a lot of intense life of spirituality. Some younger people, some are middle age, older people who are very serious spiritually, who come not just to mass every day, they find some time for prayer. It's not so hard if you're working in a city. You can do that because churches are open. But I think that's what's about to happen now, that you're going to see also people will realize, and like in the time of a war, people realize this is a dangerous time right now. Well, there's a war going on spiritually, and I think people should awaken to the realization, the clash between darkness and light has perhaps crossed a certain threshold now, and that we are very much challenged to put ourselves on the side of light and the side of prayer and giving ourselves very fully to God for others.
Yes. We're going to talk more about that when we come back. We're going to take another really quick break. We'll be right back. Let me tell you about all things Fresh Catholic, so buckle up. We have a podcast with weekly topic episodes and Fresh Catholic Daily, the daily Mass readings, on all platforms and YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, rate, and review. That would really help. Our website, freshcatholic.com, has an online store with merchandise and coffee, a blog, comics, info about our pilgrimage to Italy in September of this Jubilee year, and Fresh Catholic courses with educator Charles Merritt, including the Hail Mary, the Our Father, Sin, Sacraments and Grace, Advent, Angels, and Virtues. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Fresh Catholic with short videos every day. Email me at lori@freshcatholic.com. I'd love to hear from you. And please consider becoming a Patreon or sponsor to help support our mission of drawing people to the faith or back to the faith. Phew! Spread the word and join the fun. Thanks so much. Bye. And we're back. So I feel the same way you do, and I'm a daily masser. I pray all day, every day. I could pray more even. I really am in that groove of doing that. I do know that Christ comes first in my life, and everybody that knows me knows that. And it's all I think about. And I can't imagine my life, any other way, to be honest with you. As a matter of fact, I actually desire more. Simon and I, God willing, we would like to have a new life coming up here soon, and he's promised to build me a little chapel. A little chapel, but I would love it if everybody would go to daily mass. I think it's a beautiful way to start your day. It's more enriching. You can get closer and closer to your just consuming the Lord as much as possible, and in mind, body, and spirit. And I do think what you're saying, it is very serious. We are in a very serious time, and if you are at all in tune with the Lord, you can see these signs and it doesn't feel good. It's like, I imagine it like, when Sodom and Gomorrah, and there's the whole part of the Bible where they're talking about, will you, spare us if there's one person, like he keeps counting down, and I feel that way because it's like, you just kind of want to shake everybody and say, why don't you see that this is happening? And I think some people are noticing it more than others, and it is very concerning. And so, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know, I mean, I kind of am tending to, after hearing what you're saying, is if the people that we're looking up to in our church, like the Pope and bishops and everything, if they're starting to slide, it's hard for the rest of us to say, well, are we supposed to go with them? Are we supposed to be strong for ourselves? Like, what are we supposed to do? It's a confusing time, and I'm not confused. I kind of, it's like, I feel like the media manipulates a lot of what is said. It's hard to know who to trust. Sometimes you'll see a headline of what Pope Francis said, and then when you read the article, it's like, but he didn't say that. They're like making it seem like he's saying certain things. And then he might be saying something, I'm going, well, which is real? It's hard to know. So that's why, it would be better for us and the church and our future if there wasn't this murky gray area. It needs to be, like, we follow what we're supposed to be doing. Why are we even having the conversation? It should be, what is, not what should we do with this or how can we change it? I mean, is that make sense, or am I off track with that?
I mean, that's correct, and I think, we're all affected by personalities and, leading personalities. We are attracted to some, and like Pope Francis would have a very attractive, as a man, as a person, his love for the poor, his love for the common person. He's the kind of person that you could see sitting down with and just, being very simpatico, right there with him. But there's the other question also of truth and what God is asking of us, and there we have to hold on to the strength that we have in our traditional Catholic faith, and I think, I always when I was teaching in the seminary, one of my points of interpretation or evaluation of men, even privately, would be, is this a man of prayer or not? And I think when a seminarian was a man of prayer, to some degree, I wasn't really worried. He might go through his struggles, he might have his, he might have some difficulty, but a man of prayer is going to, manage with God's help to go forward well. And I think that's what we really need that's a bottom line thing for all of us. We have to be serious about prayer and seeking God in our Lord in a very, you know, committed way, striving to be close to Mary in our lives. I mean, people who pray the rosary every day have a different spiritual life than those who don't. And they tend to pray for others much more because of the very nature of praying Hail Marys makes us think of others in need much more. So the prayer does affect our life. It's not just, that we keep our membership, we pay our dues of membership and keep that going, but that we have a personal relationship with God, with Mary, with Jesus, a love for the Eucharist. These things are key. And then let us see how it plays out. This depends on God also. I mean, I hope Pope Francis lives a long time now. He's recovered his health, thank God. He's had some recovery time. But at some point, we're going to have another pope. There will be a conclave that sooner or later. That is a huge moment in history. When that conclave comes, and we have a college of cardinals now that comes from, very diverse areas, many, places that are on the margins, as they said. What happens with that conclave and the election of a new pope? That will be a very big moment in the history of the church. And it will tell us something, where is the church going at that point?
What are some things that you think, like in a perfect scenario, if you could just, pray and all of a sudden there was a miraculous change, what would that be that you could see like a call to action for the church itself, not the parishioners, but for clergy? What's a call to action to like change, to shift gears here to go towards the right way?
I mean, if we saw, a heroic entry in numbers also of men into the priesthood and into religious life, many of the traditional religious orders have had very serious problems. And, they've fallen and collapsed in many ways. But if we saw, a recovery of original charisms, like in New York right now, we have a few, I can think of two very good young Jesuits. One of them is not that young. He's in his 30s, but not ordained that long, about 4 years, who was a military captain who served in Iraq, and another young, good Jesuit. And if we had young men begin to come in and recognize the heroism of choosing a life all for God, that would be great. If that could happen, I was in Brazil just this past January for a retreat with the Missionaries of Charity. In Rio de Janeiro, they're ordaining 16, 18, 20 men a year in that diocese. We don't have anything like that, and I don't think in any large city in the United States. We have hardly any ordained in New York, two, three, four. That's been the pattern for the last few years. But if we had an influx like that of very good men, who really had their eyes set straight on what they're looking for in the priesthood, to give their life for souls and to live heroically and prayerfully, that would be a wonderful thing, almost miraculous, but I would think that could happen. That would be a great thing in our present time.
Yes, I agree. I know it's it's struggling for sure, and it's really too bad. But okay, anything else that you think
I
would
mean,
help?
that would, a segue on that would be, it would be nice if bishops, maybe even asked the parish priests everywhere, have holy hours, maybe once a week for vocations to the priesthood. We're ignoring this for too long. We need good men to come in and realize, the greatness of living a life all for God instead of living for what? To live in a comfortable life and success. And I mean, many men right now have been really hurt by the culture we're living in. You know, I say it sometimes in sermons. Men need to step up and realize you meant not to, live alone here, moving from woman to woman in your life. You need to get married and have children, commit your life, and we're seeing a lot of drifting in young men now, and there are reasons for that, surely. But the opposite could take place among some few who step up and realize, it's time to live heroically in this time.
I also feel right, in this temperature we've been in, especially the past, few years, I feel like Catholics are, beaten up and bashed a lot. And, I was just listening to something this morning and they were saying, everybody else, you go after Catholics and it's like, oh yeah, you can go after Catholics. You just can't go after anybody else, And it's like, I think, you know, people have a bad impression of Catholics sometimes. And I think I don't understand it because I love it so much and I want everybody to be Catholic. But it also makes me think that a lot of men, maybe they're gun shy because of, the different things that have gone on in the church. And maybe some negative connotations, but it is interesting to note that, like I said in the beginning of this episode, a lot of men are going back to the Catholic Church, and they're finding something there that they're not able to find anywhere else. Men in general are being bashed today, and I'm totally against that because I love men. I think they're very valuable, and I really, recoil when people talk about bashing men. So if men aren't feeling worthwhile in the world, they certainly are needed and necessary, absolutely, in the Catholic Church, because without priests, we don't have Mass. We don't get to partake in Mass without priests. And so maybe that's something where if men aren't feeling, that they're able to get married, or they don't feel worthwhile, they certainly would be worthwhile, if they were the right fit to be a priest. I think, that might be something, that they would find to be very valuable for them and everybody else.
Certainly, and you need strong men, in the priesthood. I mean, we've had the problem, if you have weaker type men come into the priesthood, then it will not attract, good men. So the emasculation of men in society, which in part is because of feminism and these things, that has wounded masculinity in the society. You need strong men to come to the priesthood. It's not for people. It's not for men who would not be able to get married. It's for men who are men,
Right.
who are capable of, being in leadership and are capable of choosing all for God.
Right.
And I think there are men out there like that. Hopefully, some of these men who are coming back to the church strongly, those who might go to the traditional Latin Mass, or that they step up to and realize in their own prayer that God may be calling them to another level of relationship with Him, to live all for Him.
Right. I guess
But
that's
if
what
that
I
was to
meant, was
happen,
like, if they're not finding fulfillment in the rest, in how, whatever their life looks like now, that they would think, oh, maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe I am supposed to be living my life for God, you know? And yeah. And then was there anything else that, like I was asking about, that would help shift, like, within the church, not again, not the parishioners, because I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, but more, so the priesthood obviously is very important on that list.
well, I mean, I think, the priest does affect. I'm a priest, so I have that perspective. But a love for the Eucharist is if people are given the chance to pray before the Eucharist. Communal prayer is good if parishes have opportunities for prayer. Other than just the Mass, that's always good. And I think, today too, like you're running these programs that you are, people could look to the stimulation spiritually of what's online, and to find interesting topic to read, good things, to read this book, The Hour of Testing, to look for things that, spiritual reading a good biography. I know a young man who read the biography of Charles de Foucauld, St. Charles de Foucauld now, and that took him to the seminary. So that can happen too. Good reading, good observations, taming and cutting down maybe, are turning compulsively to technology, and, being careful how we're using our minds.
Right.
All of that is important.
I've been doing a lot of, pretty much every episode has been a different author, and we've been exploring different types of books that are Catholic, related, which is good. Some have been fiction, some not. And I think, that is important to have those books out there for Catholics, so that, it's, and also reading about the saints. I think that's really important. I think they're really good role models. They're so, strong in their faith and their devotion to the Lord. I think those are really good things to read as well. What about as far as, lay people and parishioners, and you were, obviously prayer is a very important thing. I also feel, we talk about this a lot in my episodes, where people don't really know what they're doing and why. A lot of people were raised in the faith and they just go through the steps. They don't really know why. It doesn't mean anything to them because they don't really know what they're doing. And I know at our church, we're trying to really have more education in why we're doing what we're doing. And I think that draws more people to the church. And I do think parents obviously need to be firm in what they're doing with their kids. And when they see mommy and daddy wanting to go to church and really making it a priority, and, they look at that. Our children look at us as role models and say, instead of, if the parents are going, oh, I have to go to mass, so we have to pray, then, the kids don't want to do it. But if it becomes this, I don't want to say a habit, because sometimes that sounds like it's a negative connotation, but if it's like, this is what we do in our family, this is how we manage it, I think the level of success on that is way greater than, if only mom goes to church, that's not good. Mom and dad need to go. It needs to be this, thing to look forward to. I never moan and groan about going to mass. I love it. I don't like to miss it because it's really important to me. And, do you think that that's a helpful thing also?
I mean, consistent commitments is that's a key thing. I mean, at least in my family, and I think in my time when I was a young kid, it was unquestioned you went to mass on Sunday. And most people, I guess, went with their families. And so that has to be like a non-questioning thing, and it is an obligation for a Catholic. It's a grave, under grave obligation to go to mass on Sunday, the Sunday mass obligation, and to go as parents, So those things for sure. One thing, it depends on where we live, but my life was very affected by coming to know the Sisters of Mother Teresa. And I think any kind of contact with poor people is good. So if there's a soup kitchen, or there is, some kind of way of putting oneself in contact with service to the poor, that can be a good, healthy thing also, and also enjoyable.
Right.
There's always my experience with missionary of charity and also other areas, that any time you're around the poor people, you're around also good people, because volunteers who do that type of work, they tend to be very wholesome, good, and even fun people. And, a lot of good times. Some of my best friends have come from my time with the Missionaries of Charity, volunteers. And so I think that's helpful too. If you live in a city and you have those opportunities, even with, family, with children. I know a very good man who, his marriage did not last, but he brings his son and daughter, who are now, they've just turned 12 and 10, but he was bringing them for the last 4 or 5 years to the Harlem soup kitchen of the Sisters of Mother Teresa. Of course, the sisters loved seeing those kids also, and then they would help, serving, very a rough crowd who comes into that soup kitchen. And I think, the father, the children, very affected by that. They bond, all of those things are healthy. So I think that's a good thing also.
Yeah, well, especially when everybody's very self-centered, and when you do service for others and you're making a difference and you're making them happy, it makes the person doing that feel worthwhile, feel like, they're making a difference, even if it might be small, in comparison to the world, that they're doing something. And then hopefully that will, move on when they have children. But I do think that that's very important as well. And, gee, Father, I could just talk to you for like days upon days about all this, but I know your time is valuable. And I'm wondering, before I let you go, is there anything you would like to say that you didn't have a chance to say, kind of finishing this episode off?
I would just say, I don't want, the thought that anything was saying is too heavily pessimistic. I'm actually very optimistic that we're going to see an uprise of people who have more intense choice of God. And I think, but that's a choice. We stand as we're at a crossroads now. And a crossroad means you can go to the left or you can go to the right. And the manner in which we choose now for God, I think there's a serious grace in this moment to go all in for God. So that's my and that's I think what's behind that book. I think it's a crossroad moment. Let us step up, whether we're single, married, older, whatever we are, and do this for the sake of others, the souls that need to come back. I see at St. Patrick's Cathedral, a lot of people come back to confession after 25, 30 years in the confessionals of St. Patrick's because they see a line with people on confession. They may have just been visiting the cathedral and they see the line and God moves them in grace and we have people come to confession. Every priest there has that experience weekly in ways. And so I think it's a ripe moment also for receiving grace, and that our life takes another, leap in the spiritual life. So that would be my concluding thought. And I do thank you for having me on. I appreciate this.
I'm really glad you came, and we're going to put a link to your book in the show notes so people can click on that and order the book. And I do really appreciate your time. I really wish you all the best on this book. I wish us all the best that we'll get our acts together and just draw other people to the Lord. I mean, that's why I do this podcast, is in my own little small way, I'm trying to draw people to the Lord and back to the faith, and hopefully I can. And so I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Simon. And I wish you all the best, Lori. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. Order that book. You won't be sorry. Have a beautiful, blessed day. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Love you. Bye.